I'm Andy Obermiller, editor of Government Driven Investing. Today I'd like to speak with you for a few moments about energy. The green economy, one built on renewable energy and other environmentally friendly technologies, is a critical element of President Barack Obama's agenda, and the Congress is squarely behind him. This means there's immense potential. Although there's a lot of money available for energy-related items in the stimulus package, two other aspects of federal law are more important and will have long-lasting ramifications for investors. Now, before you press the stop button because that sounds about as exciting as watching someone paint a house, let me assure you that both of these subjects will prove not only riveting, but extremely profitable. Our first topic is electric power. There are big changes brewing that will affect how our nation produces electricity. This new environmental policy is an effort to reduce industrial emissions of carbon dioxide, which is sometimes referred to as a greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is thought to contribute to a phenomenon referred to as global warming. To stem this potentially disastrous climate change, Congress is proposing the cap and trade system. You've probably heard about it. It works like this. The government issues permits for a certain amount of CO2 emissions, and large companies would have to buy them to cover what their operations put into the air. These permits would be limited, and that's the cap. Now, the trade comes from the fact that the law allows unused permits to be bought and sold. If a company emits less CO2 than it's allotted, it can sell the balance of its permits to someone else. Each year, the government issues fewer and fewer permits, which reduces emissions over time. Now, it's not hard to see that where this is going to cause problems. 35% of CO2 emissions in this country come from the coal that's burned to fire electric power plants. Now, there are three things investors must keep in mind. The first is that coal is plentiful. It's also cheap, and that happy combination is why we use 1.1 billion tons of it every year. Now, coal and oil are both fossil fuels, but that's where the similarity ends. The important difference is that oil is an increasingly scarce commodity. We all know a great volume of crude must be imported each day. And that's not the case with coal. Our country has 498 billion tons of it. That's enough for more than 4 centuries of use. And not only is coal cheap and plentiful, it's also widely used, and that's the second thing to keep in mind. Coal is easy to move, and move it we do, from sources in the Midwest, in Appalachia, and in the Powder River Basin in Wyoming. We ship this fuel to utilities all over the United States. It powers 340,000 megawatts of electricity in this country, and that's more than enough juice for every home, street light, and ball field across the fruited plain. And the third thing to keep in mind is that replacing all those power plants would cost about $2 million per megawatt. And that adds up to nearly $700 billion, or roughly the same size as the entire stimulus package. Now, President Obama did say during the campaign that he'd try to bankrupt anyone who built a new coal-fired plant. But neither he nor anyone else is proposing we outright shutter all of the old ones. Everyone knows they have to be used. Our nation just can't kiss half of its power plants goodbye. So after all that, let's think about what we know. The government is going to limit CO2 emissions. That's a foregone conclusion. Cap and trade is widely supported by Congress. And coal, the incumbent power source, is cheap and plentiful and is burned in power plants we can't afford to replace. So it's time for my favorite question. What is the inevitable future? And the answer is clear. The country must find a way to burn coal in an environmentally neutral fashion. We need zero emissions coal, and we need it fast. Now, can this even be done? Has anyone in America, the most inventive and imaginative country in the history of mankind, figured this out? Yes. And believe it or not, it's something that's taught in every 4th grade science class. It's not rocket science. It's so simple, you'll be surprised you didn't think of it when I tell you about it. A power plant uses pulverized coal that's burned with the ambient air. Now, that's a $5 way of saying whatever's outside. And whatever's outside is about 70% nitrogen. When you burn coal, what comes out of the smokestacks is mostly a mix of nitrogen byproducts. It's actually less than 15% CO2. Now, the problem is that these elements are very difficult to separate. So if you don't want to have to go through the trouble of separating everything, then the smart solution is not to put the nitrogen there in the first place. After all, what makes a fire burn? It's not nitrogen, it's oxygen. And that's the secret. If a power plant burns pure oxygen using so-called Oxy-Fuel technology, then the byproducts of the coal fire are pure CO2 and water. Now those two compounds are very easy to separate. You're left with water in a tank and a pure stream of CO2. Now, despite the fact that carbon emissions are being reduced, CO2 in pure form is a valuable commodity. It can be pressurized and moved by pipeline anywhere in the country for industrial purposes. And if we run out of industrial uses, the stuff can be pumped right back into the ground. I mean, in fact, this is a great way to increase oil field production. And there are lots of uses for CO2, and zero emissions technology also means that we can continue to use coal cleanly indefinitely. That gives the nation another 400 years to figure out the next technology that will replace all the coal and natural gas-fired power plants. It also means, and this is the best part, that the companies that control the Oxy-Fuel technology are going to have an amazing moneymaker on their hands. Now, for the first year, Congress has already said it's just going to give away most of the carbon permits. That's fine, but federal law still envisions that they'll eventually be sold, and for no more than $28 per ton. Now, this is a volume business. If industry can find a way to burn coal in an emissions-free way for less than $28 a ton, it's in the plus column. And this is a critical point, so let me explain it in detail. Coal emits 2.5 billion tons of CO2 a year. If each ton must be licensed at $28, then that adds $70 billion to the industry's costs. If we assume that the owner of this crucial Oxy-Fuel technology licenses it to power plants for even a discount rate of $20 per ton, then they will have saved the power industry $20 billion. But let's be clear, they also will have made $50 billion for themselves and for their shareholders. And that's before we factor in any value for captured CO2 or assign any intangible value to the environment. Plus, let's not forget that we're not living in the world or burning coal on our own. There are 340,000 megawatts of coal-fired power in this country and twice that outside the United States. So that $50 billion in revenue could easily look like $150 billion in revenue. China recently said it would move toward a cap-and-trade system too, and it's proposed even stricter emissions timetables than the United States. As I said, this is exciting. What's even more exciting is that there are only a handful of companies with the know-how to make a power plant that burns coal this way. Now, even though it's a simple process, the nuances of how it works inside a power plant are pretty complicated. And one of the companies I've identified in the current issue of Government-Driven Investing owns more than 200 patents related to the Oxy-Fuel process. Now, I'm so confident in this technology that I've added the strongest player in the Oxy-Fuel area to my Government-Driven Investing portfolio. If you're not a subscriber, then you can access this portfolio today at streetauthority.com. I'm Andy Odermiller. Thanks for watching, and many happy returns.